Convos with Creative People is a podcast about creative paths and processes. Each episode features interviews with creators of all genres and mediums and discussions on writing, art, design, marketing, music, podcasting, and more. On the show, I talk with people not just about the things they create, but also how they do what they do and the journey that led them to where they are. Hey everybody, this is Brian here, and welcome to another episode of Convos with Creative People. I'm really excited about today's guest on the show, which is my buddy Don Cardenas, who, as you'll hear in the beginning of this episode, was the final interview that we ever did for the Secret Identity podcast. Now, Don and I have known each other for, I want to say, a little over 5 years now, through the Thrash It Out podcast, obviously through Secret Identity. Don actually did the album art for the Power Chords podcast that I do with Matt Herring. I mean, he's an amazing artist. His book, Packs of the Lowcountry, is available on Comixology now, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. He's a super talented musician. He is now a podcaster and has been doing his podcast for a while. He just actually celebrated the 25th episode of his podcast, Comics, Coffee, Metal, which we'll talk about as well. And so this discussion is kind of a hits to all fields, as often discussions that I get into on the podcast do. And we end up talking about what it's like to be a creative person amidst the pandemic. And the reason I think it was a cool discussion is that I think a lot of us are struggling with this. I know that I've actually started writing some blog posts about like trying to reestablish my creative routine in the midst of everything that's going on right now in the world. And so that wasn't really planned to get into, but we ended up getting into a discussion about that, and it kind of wove in between some of the other topics that we were talking about. And it's just a great time anytime I can get together and talk with Don, because we go down all these different roads, and hopefully anyone who is struggling with some of the same stuff that we talk about in terms of like, if you make things, whether it's music, whether it's art, whether you're a writer, whatever, we're all in this together. And we're all sort of going through these same things and trying to find our way through this uncharted territory of the situation that we're living in now. And so I think people will get a lot out of this interview. It was great to catch up with him. This was the first time that we got to chat since I was on his podcast not too long ago, which I will put a link to in the show notes as well in this episode. So again, if you go to cbrianwright.com, links to Don's Twitter, his website where you can see more of his comic work, the Packs of the Lowcountry book, the podcast. He is everywhere, and he does so many different things. In fact, another link that I'll put in the show notes is he just did, with a couple of friends of his, a heavy metal cover of I Wish It Was Christmas Today, which was a song that was on Saturday Night Live. I'm sure for a lot of people, they'll immediately know what I'm talking about, but it's 20 years old now, and he just did a metal cover of it, and it is fantastic. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. So without any further ado, I'm going to get right into it. Here is my discussion with Don Cardenas. Well, thanks so much for joining me tonight, Don. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Busy night,
but as always, right?
Yeah, but with kids and all that, it's always a busy night, right?
It is, except it's a little bit different for me now in that, you're at the stage still where you're kind of waiting to get to that point of the evening where everything has quieted down, and I have teenagers, so it's the opposite. Like it's quieter earlier on, and then it gets louder as the evening goes on. Now's the time where, especially because the kids don't have school tomorrow as we record this, it is right before Thanksgiving. So tonight they'll be going to bed later than I will. And my son's probably playing video games right now. And so if you hear any sort of yelling and screaming in the background, that's him and his buddies on Xbox playing. But yeah, I actually am nostalgic for the days where I knew if we got to a certain point of the evening, the kids would be in bed, because now I go to bed before the kids now in my house.
Oh, wow. Yeah. My daughter's, 4.5. My son's just over 1. So we're quite a ways away from, them being up longer than us, at least, on a daily basis.
But I remember the days where we had a pretty locked in routine in my house, and it was like, by whatever, 8:00, 8:30, everything was starting to settle down and stuff like that. There was a structure to it that it was kind of chaos in the beginning when the kids were super young. And then we hit like a real nice routine for a while. And then it just goes back to chaos again when they become teenagers. So that's the period of time that I'm living through now. But in any case, I'm glad the stars could align and we could have a chat tonight, because now that I'm sort of getting back in the flow of doing this particular podcast again, this is actually the third time that we've done a podcast together. There was the episode where you came on to Secret Identity, and that's probably a good place for us to start. We've known each other probably since about 2015. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, definitely. I remember I first came across you because I was a fan of our buddy Anthony Johnston's podcast, Unjustly Maligned.
Yep.
Which, I miss that podcast dearly because it's such a great podcast. But
me too.
So you were on talking about Megadeth's Risk.
Yep.
And me being a metalhead, a Metallica guy, more specifically, I always had a kind of like an interest in that album though, because it seemed, I knew Megadeth as one thing, and this kind of seemed to like really branch them out as to like whatever successful, things happened that on that album or not successful things. That's up for debate. But, that always interested me, and I really enjoyed the discussion you guys had about it. And I'm like, this is really fun. So like I instantly I messaged Anthony. I'm like, hey, if you ever want to do like Saint Anger, like I will be that guy, standing for, as the kids say, Saint Anger.
Yep.
And he's like, funny you should mention that. And then like a week later, you guys dropped the first TO episode.
Well, and I think I'm sure because we talked about this on Thrash It Out before, but that's basically how that situation played out. Was Unjustly Maligned was a phenomenal podcast where the premise was basically like, you go on and defend something that you feel is unjustly maligned. Pretty much everybody else thinks it sucks, but you love it. And I just loved the premise of that. And so when he was like, oh, do you want to come on the show and talk about music or something? I was like, oh, totally. I'll come on and do the Megadeth album. And the response to it was so positive that he ended up reaching back out to me and saying, maybe we should do a music podcast. And like, you don't have to twist my arm to talk about music. And it's obviously the same with you. Right. And so that's how basically TO began. And then, so I remember that we kind of, you were a listener of that show. We ended up getting connected. And then at the time, Secret Identity, which was the comic book podcast that I had done for, I think it was 12 years when it was all said and done with Matt Herring, you were putting out Packs of the Lowcountry, your comic at that particular time. And I don't know if you know this, but did you know that you were the last interview that we ever had on Secret Identity?
Oh, I killed the show?
You did. I think it was episode like 796.
I think you might have mentioned that to me before, and I was very honored that I even got to be on the show. And yeah, I remember I was running a Kickstarter for Packs of the Lowcountry.
Yes.
Which the less said, the better. But it was a blast talking to you about it. And it was just, coming on a show like yours that was been on for so long. And, you've had so many like storied guests beforehand. It was just like, I was actually trying not to be like really intimidated by it, because even though I, pretty much knew you from Twitter and the Facebook Thrash It Out group and all that, and we're friendly with each other, I, was still like, this guy talked to like the greats, and here I am just plugging away at my, crappy little indie comic, I guess. But yeah, that was definitely a fun thing. And I really appreciated being, on the show, much less being the last interview.
Well, don't sell yourself short, because Packs of the Lowcountry was a great comic, and I will put a link in the show notes to, it's still up on Comixology. People can go check it out there. And to be honest, like that was my favorite thing about doing Secret Identity. Obviously love talking about comics and was super into comics for a long time and had so many great memories of that show. But my favorite part was doing the interviews, which is why I'm kind of still doing that in a different, podcast nowadays. But that was my favorite part of it. And the thing that I loved the most was meeting new people and talking about their projects that they were passionate about. And that kind of is the inspiration for this show as well. And so I have a lot of questions for you, because not only are you a fantastic comic artist and comic creator, but you are also a musician, and you are also now a podcaster, which you had not started doing when we first talked back in 2017 for the Secret Identity podcast. So, but since we started with comics, let's just talk about that for a few minutes, because one of the things that I want to highlight on this show is the sort of creative path that people have taken, like not only kind of how you do what you do, but why, and sort of what brought you to that. So what got you into art, and then into specifically like wanting to create comics?
Well, it's like the same old story with pretty much every artist. Like as far as back as I can remember, I was drawing. I was always drawing. I loved it. I remember, very clear, like it's some of my strongest memories of my childhood are what I was drawing, for good or bad. And it's like, I remember the first time I drew like all 4 Ninja Turtles, and I drew a building that actually had like, 2-point perspective or something like that. It was terrible, whatever grade I was in perspective, execution wise, but I just had the strong memory of, drawing that image and, just various things throughout the years. And I'd ended up going to a high school that you could select a path. Essentially, you could select like art or science or, one of the trades or something like that. And I selected the art, the commercial art curriculum or whatever. And I got really disillusioned, I guess, or I lost a lot of interest. The art teachers we had in the first couple of years, they were pretty much phoning it in.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time it got to my junior year, I was just kind of like, well, I'm already here. I'm going to keep doing it. My creative interest had shifted to photography, and I was just starting to get into playing bass. And the teachers that came on during those years, they were like almost mad at how little progress our classes had made in terms of like simple art things. And so they were like really trying to whip us into shape and do all these things. And I was thinking to myself, like, wow, if I had this teacher my freshman year, I probably would have like kept some sort of little passion or fire going for comic art. And also this was like the mid to late 90s. So comics weren't exactly, with some exceptions, of course, they weren't exactly stellar in themselves. And I had lost a lot of interest in what I was reading. I grew up, the prime of my comic buying was the middle end of like the initial Image boom.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember when it was coming out, but I also remember I was picking up a lot of Image books for like 25 cents.
Right. When the bubble burst.
Yeah. Just like my prime area was probably, I want to say around the X-Men, probably the Age of Apocalypse era. That was like the height of it for me. And I think that's like 96.
I think it was too. And it's funny. I don't want to derail that thought, but I actually had been out of collecting comics for a little while, and I sort of got in and out of it a couple times. And one of the times that I got back into it was when I was in college. We had a comic book shop that was literally right down the street from the apartment that I was living in college. And so I started collecting comics again. And it was Age of Apocalypse, and it was the 2099 universe from Marvel that were my big things that I collected at the time. So that's what made me think of it when you said Age of Apocalypse.
Yeah. Oh, I loved that. I loved X-Men 2099. Skullfire's my dude. Like, if those random tweets that go around, creators, it's like, what property would you love to tackle? My first thought's always like, either, this obscure X-Men character named Maverick or X-Men 2099. Like that's...
Oh, dude. It is the only series the only series of like group of books that I have the entire collection of. I have every 2099 book that was put out for every one of the titles. So all the Spideys, the Dooms,
Ravage,
the
Punisher,
Ghost
Hulk.
Rider, Ravage, even the Fantastic Four, all of that stuff. I have all of them. And it is like I was weirdly obsessed with it because it had that cyberpunk feel to it,
Yeah,
you know? And so
definitely.
for me, it was like, that's what totally drew me into that. But that for me was the main stuff I was collecting. And then the Age of Apocalypse stuff too was the other thing that I was into.
Yeah. And I guess, it was just such these radical shifts from what we were used to. But yeah, so towards the end of the 90s, like that kind of stuff was over. I was buying a lot of Top Cow comics, a lot of Marvel and X-Men stuff, but none of it was really doing it for me. So I kind of quit comics cold turkey. And I just, after high school ended, I just kind of stopped drawing. I thought I'd be going into photography. And I went to a very expensive school for photography for about a semester. And after realizing that this is not what I want to do, I kind of just, dropped that and just was kind of, searching around for what I wanted to do. And somewhere in the mid 2000s, I want to say, I was just kind of at a point where I was just like still trying to find my thing. And I just kind of remembered fondly some, comics I was reading and drawing and stuff like that. So I had kind of like a 10-year gap in between drawing from, end of high school to when I really started trying to pick it up a bit more. And I bought some comics off of Amazon, and I was slowly started getting back into that. And then, I just started doodling and, just kind of drawing here and there. And it's kind of feeling like, oh, maybe I'll do like a silly web comic or something like that, something real simple. And I never did anything like that, but it got to a point where the comic shop I started going to, Challengers Comics in Chicago, they were hosting the 24-hour comic book day, 24-hour comic book day. And that's when a bunch of creators would come, park their butts in that store for 24 hours straight and bang out a 24-page comic, start to finish.
Yep.
And I sat down and I did it, and it was this crazy, fun experience. It was exhausting. I did not finish, but I left with a sense of like, wow, I really love doing this. So I did that a few more times as well. I finished a couple times. But it's also there. I was able to meet like local creators and kind of talk to them a bit. And that kind of got that ball rolling for me again. And also I was listening, I just started like listening to podcasts, and the owner of the shop, that I went to, he was on a podcast, and that podcast was Around Comics, which is another long-standing comic books podcast. Yep. And they mentioned one of the hosts was like, "Oh yeah, I also do this other podcast called 11 O'Clock Comics," which is like, I don't know outside of the realm of people I know, but it's my understanding it's a very big podcast. It's got a ton of listeners, it's got a ton of fans, and at the time they were getting the ball rolling. And I started listening to that show. I joined their forum back when forums were a thing, before Facebook groups kind of took that all over. And I started meeting people, and talking about making comics. And I ended up meeting the writer of Pax of the Lowcountry on there. And that's kind of what started me, getting more serious about making comics. I sold my first art commissions on that forum. I've, made friends on that forum that, I've just did some coloring for someone I met on that forum, almost 10 years ago now. And it's been, kind of crazy seeing like how much, that one little event has just kind of like branched out in my creative life. Like, because I don't know if I would be doing the same things I'd be doing now if not for that.
I think that is such an important thing for people who might be listening and just thinking about like their own creative path. Like, the community aspect of being a creator, whether it's writer, artist, musician, whatever, putting yourself out there, right? First of all, to become part of a community, to start, because I think when people hear like networking, especially like I'm an introvert. I know a lot of us that are creators are introverts. We like spending time in our own heads, right? And so you're kind of working against the grain when you put yourself out there and you reach out to people that you don't know, or you show up in an event at a local comic shop, or you take part in an event online or something like that. But it almost always is the start of something when you put yourself out into a community. Like I can think of so many relationships that came through Secret Identity and started with a forum discussion, or started with a conversation at a comic book shop or a comic book convention, or, those types of, you mentioned forums. Like I remember when we were part of the comic forums, and there was like 50 podcasts that had their, forums in there, and we all were kind of jumping in and out of each other's forums and stuff like that. And just that sense of community, and how big of a role that it plays in your creative, journey, right? Because like you said, had you not thrown yourself out there for that event around, 24-hour comic book day, who knows? I mean, not that you wouldn't have gotten into creating comics again or something like that, but just the path that you took, that was a huge part of that journey.
Yeah. And to step back just for a second, like a lot of that is because of the shop I went to, Challengers Comics in Chicago. And I only came across them by happenstance. I just happened to look in Chicago. There was two main papers, the Tribune and the Sun-Times. And for a while they had like these like hip versions of themselves for like a quarter or free. You would get I think it was called the Spot and something else, whatever. It was like these, but it was more, I guess, hip events, or just more designed for younger people to try to get into reading newspapers. And one of them was just laying in the break room at work one day, and I was just flipping through, and there was an ad for Challengers on there. Like they just opened like the couple weeks before. And I was looking for a new shop, and I'm like, oh, this is right by work. I didn't know these guys existed. And just by that happenstance, I meet the owners, and, all that stuff just kind of rolls. And and you mentioned community, and I'm incredibly lucky to have found the community I did in Chicago, because Chicago is not only, you can't throw a stone without hitting like a cool comic person in Chicago. And everyone there has just been so nice and welcoming, and guys like Mike Norton, and at the time Chris Burnham, and Ryan Brown, and I'm Jill Thompson, and there's just all these people in Chicago that are just fantastic creators that they really were welcoming when you would see them in events and stuff like that. And I was, the introvert. I am the introvert. I don't know if I can rightfully call myself an introvert, considering how much I like go out there to talk to people now, but it was definitely a learning curve. And if you're a creative person and you're feeling that like kind of wall of nervousness between everything, it's the biggest thing that helped me was just remembering like, that's all of us. That's even the people behind the table at the conventions. They're nervous as shit too. Like we're all anxiety riddled, just, we're all, got the flop sweats, and we're all just super nervous. So you just kind of have to go through that a bit, and there's creators where I'll still be a bit tongue tied if I'm trying to talk to them or whatever. But then there's people who I was like frozen, able to get like maybe 2 words out. And now, I can have, great full on conversations with them, and then leave and not be, and not have any extra dampness under the arms or anything like that, So it's really just kind of putting yourself out there, which is, more scary than like making your thing and putting it out there. Right. Because if you make your comic and you put it out there and no one likes it, it's like, well, maybe it wasn't for people. Maybe I could have done this better. But if you put yourself out there and you're not getting a response, It's like, oh, they just don't like me. And it's incredibly daunting to try to face. But if you just approach it with that, the idea of those people are nervous too, it's not our natural habitat, creative people.
Right. And I think the other thing too is like, there is a community for everybody. And so you just have to seek it out and find it. Right. And there's different ways to do that. It could be walking into the comic shop. It could be going online and having a conversation. I think that it's a little bit more challenging nowadays, because I think there's a surface level of the culture, not just of comics, but of music and of games and of everything else that's so toxic now that I think in a lot of ways it kind of scares people off from that. But those smaller communities and those more human connections are definitely still out there. And if you are putting yourself out there and you're searching for those, you will connect with people who are very supportive and very, you can get a lot of inspiration from. And at the end of the day, like, people want to talk about the things that they're passionate about. And that was, one of the reasons we started Secret Identity back in the day, was because we wanted to recreate that comic shop experience. Because Matt, when I met him, was running a comic book shop. Like, that's how the origin story of Secret Identity is, that I had been out of reading comics for years since my college days. And I heard that Peter David was going to be launching a new Spidey series. It was Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. And when Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man was coming out, and it was like, oh, that's a good jumping on point for me. I'm going to go and check that out because it's a brand new series. Peter David's writing it. I'm going to go check that out. So I went to a local comic shop here in my city of Springfield, and Matt was one of the owners of it. And so we started talking, and just about me having not read comics for years and stuff like that. And then he invited me to hang out at his house after a couple trips to the comic book store. You should come over, Friday nights we get together, we watch Battlestar Galactica. And so we were watching Battlestar Galactica. And then when the season was over, I didn't want to give my Friday nights with my friends up. And I said, well, why don't we do a podcast? And he had no idea what a podcast even was at that particular point in time. But that was basically the origin story. And it all started from a conversation in a comic shop about sort of returning to comics and, the stuff that I was interested in reading and stuff like that. And so sometimes you don't even have to really try that hard to put yourself out there, and you will sort of stumble into a community of supportive and inspiring people that will sort of open up the next part of that creative path, right, for you and stuff like that. And then that, the podcast stuff for me led to writing, which led to sort of doing a bit of games journalism, which was always a dream of mine, and then comic stuff. And so, yeah, I think that, that's a really important thing that you hit on is that idea of like putting yourself out there and connecting with the community, and that really being a catalyst for a lot of things.
And yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that, because I've had this conversation with a few younger people. It's awesome. Like with social media, you can like tag your favorite creator and, have some sort of interaction with them. But I've, had a few people, feel kind of like, oh, well, it feels like, I don't get much of a response from these people. Or I'm like, it's about finding your peers online. And if you're approaching a relationship like you're expecting something, like, I've told a couple people, like, if you're to do a piece of art and you're proud of it, cool, post it, whatever. But if you're like tagging, every creator under the sun that, every professional that you admire, saying, hey, what do you think of this? Hey, what do you think of this? Hey, what do you think of this? Like, it becomes kind of, I know for some people, it kind of throws up a wall of like, oh, this person is just looking for praise from me or something like that. And, not that we all haven't been guilty of like trying to get that approval from someone we admire. I'm guilty of it myself. It's the most beneficial thing you can do is just trying to find those peers. And like you said, it's almost harder these days than there's like a sweet spot in the early 2010s.
There really was a sweet spot. And I feel like what happened was it it was too much access that we all had. And what that just led to was this sense of entitlement.
Yeah. Things became so fragmented, like so many groups became just subgroups of subgroups of subgroups, that these larger peer groups you could, find like-minded people with and friends with, it became just a harder target to hit, because, you would think you have something in common with these people, and then there'd be some like major like dissection from some core belief you have that they all subscribe to. And you're like, oh, well, we have 90% of the stuff in common, but this 10% I can't deal with. So it's like, in the 20, you didn't really have that so much. People were just more excited about sharing the things they enjoyed, as opposed to being more excited about sharing what they hate.
Yeah. And I kind of have a rule about anyone that I interact with that has made something that I really enjoy. And that is that I don't want anything from them. I just want to tell them that I really like the thing that they made. Like that was it. Like that's kind of how I've always approached conversations with, like, whether it's interviews or anything like that, or like meeting a creator at a show or something like that I'm a huge fan of. And just like, I just want to let you know, I really, really appreciate the thing that you made. And it, in some cases, had like this dramatic effect on me. I'll never forget, I met George Romero shortly before he passed away. I was actually at a horror convention, and I was selling books. And one of the staff there was the Connecticut Horror Fest, and great people that run that show. But one of the people that was working the show came over towards the end of the day and had said, "Hey, did you get a chance to meet George Romero yet?" And I said, "No, I don't want to bother him. Like he literally had been signing all day. The line was just around the corner for him all day." And I had watched him because I had a vantage point of his table from where I was at. And he was so gracious with every single person that came to him that day. And I was just blown away by that. And the last thing in the world I wanted to do was bother him, at that particular point. And so this person that was working the show said, "Listen, I'll watch your table for a couple of minutes. Go over and just meet the guy. He's super nice, and you'll regret it if you don't." And sure enough, he ended up passing like 6 months after this situation. But I just went over and, got to tell him how much I appreciated his work and what a big inspiration it was for, my horror writing and just my love of the genre and all that kind of stuff. And he was so gracious and so nice. But that was it. I just wanted to let him know that, because I think that happens a lot now is creators are asked to critique work. Creators are asked to, there's an expectation, right? Of like, "Hey, look at my thing," or, "Hey, can you help me talk to this person?" or, "Hey, can you do this?" And it's like, I think that's where things kind of went awry with social media, is that the access was like too much and too soon and too overwhelming. And then it just kind of took a wrong turn somewhere. Yeah, and so it is tough to navigate now. So if you are, an up and coming writer, artist, musician, whatever, it's hard to even know how to, to try to navigate those things. But, I try to just approach it from a standpoint of like, I just let the people know who make things that inspire me, that I really appreciate the stuff that they've created. Because the other thing too is like, they also hear a ton of negative stuff all the time. Even like our most beloved creators also hear negative stuff all the time too. So I just like want to let them know, "Hey, I like that thing that you made." Like, and I sort of leave it at that.
No, yeah, definitely. And I can certainly, subscribe to that idea of just, you see someone you admire and you like the thing, tell them you like it, and it just, it's about creating having an honest, assessment with yourself about what you're expecting this interaction to be. Cause again, it's something that it just comes up, just a lot of us are very prone to having a lot of anxiety about interactions and things like that. And it's not a secret in the creative world that's kind of a box you get checked off when you're like, oh, I create things. It's like, okay, you're going to have some sort of anxiety, right? So it's like finding that just being honest with yourself about this interaction. Because if you could say, hey, I told this creator I love their work and they liked the tweet. Cool. They saw that I said I liked it. You can be happy with that because that was the honesty of your intention. But if the intention was something other than that, then you're going to be disappointed and you're kind of setting yourself up for some kind of resentment that really shouldn't be happening. And I'm only speaking of this because, I have experience with this.
Sure. Yeah.
It was lessons I learned. There's definitely people where I'm like, hey, we have like 99% of things in common. We should be like best bros. But for some reason, there's just like whenever there's any type of interaction, it's just like nothing.
Right.
So it's like, okay. And then you once you learn to like just kind of let that kind of stuff go, you find interactions with people and you develop friendships and peers that you wouldn't expect it to, but you gain so much more from than, you could have ever expected.
Well, that's the thing that's the important thing I think that you just hit on, which is that like, if you put yourself out there and you find your community, you will find people within that community that are willing to look at your work and willing to share creative tips and willing to collaborate and willing to, because depending on where they're at in their creative journey, there is this idea of wanting to give back and wanting to mentor a bit and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so that's there, in these communities. Like when you find your community, you'll find that element within it as well. And I think that's really a more sort of organic way to sort of get that feedback and have those discussions. And like I can only imagine like doing the 24-hour, when you said that, it reminded me of the 48-hour film project, which we had done years and years ago, of like make a movie in 48 hours. And they give you like a topic and a line that you have to include and a prop that you have to use and stuff like that. And then it's like go time from that. So I like those, and having done like NaNoWriMo and stuff like that, which is actually going on right now. Those are the types of things where that kind of creative energy breeds discussion and breeds sort of collaboration and breeds those kind of great creative conversations, because everybody's working on this thing at the same time and they're all, super creative right now. And there's so much energy to that kind of stuff. And it's, those are great moments and great conversations to be a part of. And so I can totally see how that can kind of fuel your creative journey and kind of accelerate that sort of path.
Yeah. And these are experiences that, have, again, forged, friendships and peer groups and things that, and it also has given me a lot of, confidence, or I've learned a lot about making comics or techniques or things like that, just because you're in this big creative thing, like this creative pressure cooker for a day. And then, and as great as that is, by the time you're done, you're like, all right, I never want to see any of you ever again in my life.
Sure. Yeah. I'll see you next year when we go through this again.
Yeah. And then the next, especially when, for most of the 24-hour comic book days, I was sharing the, it was also a space where Mike Norton was doing his 24-hour comic book days. And for people who may not know, Mike Norton is a very prolific and talented comic book artist, created the series Battle Pug, but his 24-hour comics look like fully formed comic books.
Oh yeah. Like he would have them at shows. Like you could go and pick up his, year's 24-hour comic. The art was more loose in some, but none of it was like unprofessional. Right. It was amazingly polished for a 24-hour comic book.
And same thing with Ryan Brown of, God Hates Astronauts fame and Curse Words. Like those guys, like what they're able to do in 24 hours is just like completely inspiring and demoralizing. It's insane. But, but having that kind of energy and that kind of like level of, skill happening around you, it's like, you learn a lot from it. You can absorb a lot of it. And, it's definitely no surprise that, that when I started finishing the 24-hour comic book days, when I actually had like a 24-page comic was when, those guys were around, like, cause you're just kind of feeding off of that energy.
And you're kind of absorbing how they approach a project like that, right? Because they, in order to be able to finish those types of projects, and similarly with like a NaNoWriMo or any sort of timed, creative window around that kind of stuff, it's like when you start to really understand your output, your approach to storytelling, that kind of stuff, then you can work within a framework like that. But that's a learning process, and seeing other people who have kind of figured that out, for me is super inspiring. And I just want to like absorb every bit of it of like, yes, how are you doing that? Okay, great. Oh, I see what you did there. Like it's more, your process is more efficient because you approach it this way and stuff like that. And so it's like a crash course in process.
Yeah. And it certainly prepped me for, projects I would take on in the future, whether if it's having to work on a time crunch or just, employing certain techniques to make sure I get things done faster. So,
well, I want to hit on process a little bit for comics before we talk about a couple of other things. So just in terms of your kind of creative process, first of all, are you digital now, or are you still analog as far as your comic creating process?
For the finished product, I'm both.
Okay.
I've kind of started earlier this year. I kind of started doing this thing where I put out like a more a lower page rate for myself for like short stories for independent artists. Like, hey, I want to do some more short stories. So for up to 6 pages, I'm offering my pencils and inks for $50 a page, and that's not cheap, if you're paying for it out of pocket, like these writers are. But in the scheme of things, I feel like that's a fair trade for what I can do versus, and, what they'll be getting in return. And the caveat was it's all digital because, earlier this year I finally, after hemming and hawing about it for way too long, I hunkered down and bought an iPad Pro. And that is an amazing device. And it really lets me, just kind of get little bits of work done where I can throughout the day. So that way, I'm not jamming, all this extra stuff at the end of the day when the house is quiet and the kids are down. So, when Sesame Street is on, I can go, I got 20 minutes. I can, start inking a panel or doing some layouts or something like that on the iPad. And not that I couldn't do that kind of stuff traditionally with pen and ink and stuff like that. But, my kids being the lovely, curious creatures they are, they see daddy holding a pen and a paper or whatever. Whatever they're doing is, they don't care anymore. They want to see what's daddy doing with the pen and making these marks. Like, so if it's on a tablet or whatever, they're kind of like, oh, daddy's on the big phone or something like that.
Right. It's not as captivating for them.
Yeah. So yeah, especially since, I try to get them to draw on paper with pencils and stuff. So if I'm using the same stuff, they're like, oh, is this what we're doing now?
Right. It's like, oh, it's color. It's creating time. Great.
Yeah. And daddy's iPad's off limits. So they know they can't touch it or they're told they can't touch it.
Right.
Still try. But yeah, so that's really opened that up. But I love working traditionally. I love, working with a nib and a brush pen, whatever, so kind of the work I'm doing for myself and commissions, I do that traditionally, but I'll still start digitally. I'll start doing layouts and things like that and thumbnails and working things out digitally because it's a lot faster to like resize a head or fix a hand in the layout stages digitally than it is, erasing and redrawing. And so yeah, it starts off with, pretty much everything starts off with digital, but ending, it's like if I'm doing one of these short stories, I'm doing digital. If I'm doing my own work, my own creator-owned stuff, I'm working traditionally because these are pages I want to have. And well, for right now, I was it's on hiatus right now. But in the beginning of the year, I started this comic, a Patreon comic called Emissary, and it was all me. I was writing everything. I even went to a website and got my I submitted my handwriting much neater than I actually write, but they transferred it to like a font for me. So it's like my writing as the font.
That's pretty cool.
Because if I were to hand letter it myself, it would be an absolute mess. But I can sit and focus and do the alphabet and have that nice and legible, and then have them process it, whatever they do. And I was working on this comic, and I was also providing a soundtrack for it, and just pouring everything out, all my creative juices into it. And then the pandemic hit, and things kind of stalled out, and kind of had to put it on hiatus. And along the lines there, I'm like, well, I can't seem to get this back up and running right now, so I'll start doing these short stories and things like that. So I've been primarily digital for most of this year, I would say, but I am, at the end of this month, I'll be free of all my current commitments digitally, and I will be jumping back into banking a few more Emissary pages, and hopefully kickstarting the whole book once it's all done, and just dropping the Patreon idea, because I love Patreon as an idea, but I tried it. It's not for me. And if you're listeners, what
right.
Patreon is. It's a website where essentially you can pay a monthly fee to have access to a creator's works, be it videos or essays, writings, photography, music, whatever. And there's different tiers to have different levels of access to things. And, mine was pretty simple, but ultimately it just seemed like it wasn't for me. But I gave it a shot and I tried it out. And, but I think I just want to kind of finish this book and then put out the Kickstarter with the soundtrack and kind of have that whole finish thing. Cause I think that's probably, cause it's been a long process for me figuring out what feels best creatively, not only while I'm creating something, but how I want to present it.
Yes. Well, and man, there's a couple of good things that I want to unpack there. So one of them is that, this idea of Patreon, because like, we have a Patreon for Thrash It Out, right? So people can, and it's one tier, it's $1 if people want to support the show and stuff like that. And one of the reasons that we did it that way was just because we didn't want to overcomplicate it, right? And so, but that whole idea of like figuring out how to monetize the creative output that you're sort of putting out, and feeling like there are certain options that you should try to explore, and this could be things like, my buddy and I tried to, tried to get into Twitch streaming and having our YouTube channel and, running ads on stuff and things like that, and seeing if we could monetize some of our gaming content. And then there's the Patreon model, and obviously there's the Kickstarter model. And now recently I was looking at things like Substack, where you can basically create your own newsletter and have people subscribe to your newsletter and support you in that way. And it's like, everybody has to figure that out for themselves. Like, what is the best fit for how you want to create and what it is that you're creating. And as you said, how you want to present that, and how, and if you want to monetize that, like that's going to be different for everyone. And I think that's kind of just a lesson you learn when you go through it, right? Is because like, there was a time where everybody's doing Patreon. So if you're a creator, you should have a Patreon.
Yeah.
And I was looking at, I mean, I created a Patreon account because I was going to do short stories through Patreon and stuff like that. But my biggest concern about that sort of thing is that people are essentially subscribing to you when you do that. And then that means that you have to fulfill their expectations for whatever that relationship is now.
And yeah, and that's exactly what I came up against is like, I created these own expectations of what I expected to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the pandemic hit and all of a sudden my structure fell out from under me for what I can do and expect of myself, and any backlog of pages and stuff I had, that got burned through real quick.
Yep.
So once it was kind of, coming up against that, I was like, well, yeah, I think I don't like the idea. I decided I didn't like the idea of having that expectation. I preferred to have the, hey, I have this thing. It's ready. You want it?
Yep. Totally.
As opposed to like, hey, I'm making this thing. Want to come along with me? Like, and for some people that's fantastic. There's a lot of great Patreons out there. And I've considered, I may be considering keeping it for my podcast just because it's simple to do for the podcast. Basically the same thing you guys do. And just to have it out there and not deactivate it. But yeah, for comics, it's just like, there's enough pressure for me on myself to get it done than to add the additional pressure of like, oh, people are waiting for this now. So if I don't have this page up, and they've already been billed, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? So yeah, that was just like adding a whole new layer of additional anxiety to it that I thought I was able to handle and was not. So I'm like, nope, shut it down.
And that's the other thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was this idea of just the pandemic and what it has done to everyone. But I think from the standpoint of being a creator, the mental toll that this pandemic has taken on creators and just the hindering of the creative process, because I think, when everything initially shut down, like on paper, it looked like that was going to be a really productive time for creators, right? It's like, okay, we're all introverts. The world just shut down. We're actually going to get more work done from a creative standpoint because of this than we might have gotten otherwise. And I think there was this small window of time where creators kind of told themselves, like, this could be really good from a creative standpoint. Like, I'm going to have, everybody's working at home now and we're going to be kind of doing all this stuff. And what no one kind of gave credence to was this idea that the fact that we're living through the, greatest health crisis of our lives is going to take a toll on our mental health and our ability to be creative in the first place. And so even if you're at home more and you have the ability or the, quote unquote time to dedicate toward creating things, the fact that we're living through the apocalypse right now is actually going to affect your ability to be creative. And so I feel like for a lot of people who, writers, artists, musicians, whatever, there's been this kind of like identity crisis for the past several months where it's been like, I thought I was going to be more productive and I'm less productive. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how to reconcile that. Right. Yeah. And so, like I know I'll just speak personally for me, like my writing output has been near nothing during this entire time. When I thought at least I would be able to keep up my normal pace. And if not, I would have some real times where I could like double down and really have a larger creative output. And that just hasn't been the case. And I think we're so gracious with other people. Like I can talk to you as a friend and say, Don, don't be so hard on yourself. Like, yeah, so you haven't gotten as many comic pages as you'd like to get done. And maybe your Patreon hasn't been as prolific as you would have liked it to be, but we're living through the apocalypse. Like, take it easy on yourself. But I would never allow that for myself. Like, I don't give that grace to myself. I only give.
It's funny you say that, because I did a podcast episode where I was basically talking to the listener, like, about trying to create in a quarantine and how we're putting this pressure on ourselves and we don't owe it. And I listened back to it not too long ago, and aside from cringing at at the quality of it, I realized I was kind of talking to myself, and I still didn't listen.
Well, of course not. Yeah.
So yeah, I hit a real rough patch in, I want to say, the late spring, early summer, and just it lasted for a while, and then just in the fall, things started to pick up again, and it was after I did a lot of mental health work that I needed to not give myself so much pressure on it. I'm fortunate to be in a position to where art is not my main sole source of income.
Right.
So that's a benefit of that. But even then, it is something I'm driven to do. So, just not doing it isn't in the cards. So I've had to really break myself down and kind of focus on and rethink what is the best way for me to create that I am the most happy with in general, in this current situation our world is in what, because, things may look hopeful now with the pandemic and 3 different companies having high success rates supposedly with vaccines, and I'm not going to bring politics into this, but things look hopeful for the country and for some sort of maturity to be presented with how we proceed forward and approach things. But we're still in the thick of it. Like, things are still going to get worse before they get better. And so it's really just kind of like, I kind of like took this fall, the season of the fall, and I'm kind of like feeling like we're in an eye of a storm right now, and just kind of like shoring up myself to like, best be prepared to be able to continue to create, just not have a hard expectation of how much I'm going to create.
Yes. I agree with everything that you just said there. And I think it is like a time where, we figured out that this is something that deeply affects your ability to be creative. And so you have to take care of yourself first. It's that whole, like, you need to put your own mask on before you can help anybody else, in terms of the oxygen mask on the airplane. And that's, I think, what we're all sort of learning now, is that if you have to practice some self-care, you have to adjust your expectations. You have to kind of get back to basics and figure out what it is that and just remember what it is that you love about creating, and then don't put the expectations on yourself. Like, I try to think now more of like time spent as opposed to output. So it's really, for me now, more about making sure that I'm structuring in time to be creative into what my schedule is now, what my life is now, and not worrying about what the output is, but just worrying about respecting that time and dedicating that time to putting words down or doing research for a story. Or like in this case, the thing that I'm working on right now is actually creating like a series Bible for the books that I've already written, to really kind of look at where things are at right now and where it's going next, but to kind of take stock of everything. Cause I didn't do that at the beginning of this, of these books that I started writing. And so now it's kind of like, this is a good place for me to revisit everything that I've done already, to kind of put some new structure around things and also take stock of what I have, but also get back that time, in my schedule of sort of being creative and making sure that I get back in the routine of that. And so that's the only expectation right now, and not trying to put too much pressure on myself around that. So I think that's really important too, because obviously you and I are talking about it. I've had this conversation with many of my friends. It seems pretty consistent that we're all struggling with this idea of how creative and productive we thought we were supposed to be during this period of time. And for almost everyone I've talked to, that has not panned out that way. And so really kind of dealing with that and adjusting to that and just kind of getting back to basics. So,
yeah. And, I've spoken to professionals about this regarding mental health, and like one of the most recent, but also really good pieces of advice I was given was, every day, just try to set yourself up for your best possible outcome for that day. Because you can sit here and plan like, oh, by the end of this week, I'm going to have all this done. But that doesn't always work out. So, in the beginning of that day, just, look at what you need for that day and just do your best to work with that. Because a good example is yesterday. Like I had all these expectations. I'm going to do all these things. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go for a nice run, and do all this stuff. And then I got, body slammed with a killer migraine for half the day. And if you've ever had a migraine, you're like, you're not doing jack shit that time. So, I just, instead of stressing out about it, I just kind of did what I had to do to take care of it. And then once I felt better, I was able to kind of get back on the horse and tackle some of the things I wanted to tackle that day, and, knock some things off of my list creatively and just in general. And, I could feel better about that day than if I would have just, moped and been pissed off about, losing that time because of something unexpected. So if it helps anybody, like I say, just try to set yourself up best for that day, and don't beat yourself up if something comes up, because you just, try to add it to tomorrow, adjust your goals, adjust your expectations, because if 2020 has shown anything, it's going to throw us things every day we're not expecting.
Right.
Whether it's, the obvious thing of the pandemic, or if it's even something like, a beloved celebrity passing away and that somehow affects you emotionally, you didn't expect it to, or if, just the idea that you can't go do some of the normal things you go do is really getting to you that day. Like, oh, I can't, go out to, I'm not wanting to go out to eat and contribute to that, risk, but that's something I love doing. And you just beat yourself up about it. Like, you never know when that stuff's going to hit you. And so it is really about just kind of setting yourself up in a more micro level.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to touch on before we wrap up is the podcast stuff. Because when we last did an interview for Secret Identity a few years ago, you had not yet started your podcast. And what I want to know from you, because I don't know if we've ever kind of talked about this, but obviously comics, coffee, and metal, three things that I love as well, which is just other things that you and I sort of have in common. What made you want to start a podcast? Like, in addition to being a musician, in addition to doing comics, in addition to being a parent, you decided to start a podcast.
Yeah, I made that fantastic decision, like most males in my age group.
Exactly, right? Like, was it just that you got a letter in the mail that said, hey, you haven't started your podcast yet.
You're a couple years behind, buddy.
Yeah, it's about time to do that. Like, where did that come from?
Wanting to do a podcast has been in my mind since before my kids were born, because I initially, when my wife and I were like getting ready to like, okay, it's time to start, having the kid discussion and when we're going to do that. I had an idea for a podcast called Arts and Dads, where I wanted to talk to creative people about who were parents and the relationships they have with their kids and what they have with their dads or, their parental figure, not just keeping it, all male. And I'm like, wow, that's something I really wanted to do, but I just never had time. At the time I was working a lot and had a terrible, terrible commute. And I didn't have the setup to do it. And so that just didn't work out. And then somewhere in between there and a couple of years ago, I was just kind of working on my own brand logo. And I was just kind of thinking, oh, I just, Don Cardenas art, that just seems, I need something more. And I'm like, well, what represents me? And, it was kind of like one of those things where it's like, I was looking around the room and I literally see like comics, coffee, metal. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I did some, some image searches and some Google searches to make sure I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. And nothing with that exact 3 phrase came up. So I'm like, okay. So that just kind of was my moniker for a while, and then the idea for the podcast came. I originally wanted to do a video cast on YouTube, and there's a few of them still up on YouTube, where I would just interview somebody and, I would put up like little editor's notes, like you would see in a comic book, but I would have like the caption, like, oh, we're talking about, Pat's talking about this. Or if I mention someone else from a previous show, it's like, oh, see episode, blah, 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 like little things like that, or show up images of what they're talking about. And because I was just starting with the packs of a Lowcountry Kickstarter, I'd gotten into doing some video editing. And so I kind of wanted to like build off of that and, start adding that to my skill set. But the main impetus behind it was I just wanted to have longer conversations with people who I consider my friends or I'm friendly with, who I just don't have a chance to sit down and talk to.
Right.
Like in the middle of the day, I can't jump on Skype and, join, and chat with a bunch of people while they're working and stuff because I'm taking care of my kids. So I wanted to create a scenario to where I could just talk to these people and have some sort of reason to. And it started off with that. It started off with my friends, people I knew. And just recently it's starting to branch off to people I don't know, people I've like just met. So I'm starting to like rethink my approach to things and like, well, if I'm gonna be talking to someone I don't really know, keeping it like a loose conversation, like I was trying to do with the other ones, it kind of doesn't work as well. Like, not that they're bad podcasts or terrible to listen to. It's just, there's less of a flow when you don't know the person as well. And I'm just kind of expecting the conversation to be what it is. Cause I don't go in with a set list of things. Mm-hmm. Like you were on the show in beginning of the summer. And, the only thing I ask everybody is comics, coffee, and metal. What are you digging right now? And
right.
That could branch off. That could be the entire show. But more often than not, there's some facet where we start talking about something else and, so on and so forth. And so as it started as an excuse to talk to my friends that I didn't have a chance to have longer conversations with at shows or just in general, it started becoming like, oh, I like this person. Like most recently, the episode I'm editing right now, I'm speaking to a guy named John O'Deener. And he's a very accomplished rock drummer. He's toured the world. And just in the middle of a pandemic, he started a coffee company called Rootless Coffee. And I just happened to come across him because a friend of mine did artwork for one of his bags. And I'm like, I tried the coffee. I'm like, I love this coffee. I just messaged him. I'm like, hey, you want to come on the show? Cool. And that's just like a new person I've befriended and met in the past couple months. I'm like, okay, let's come on the show and let's chat. So that was a newer experience for me because I didn't know him for any extended period of time, aside from some anecdotes and some Twitter exchanges and stuff like that. So it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier in the podcast where, I'm just kind of like branching out a little bit more and, trying to be, a little more out, a little more forward, a little more outgoing, and trying to put myself out there a little bit more, because, I could ask someone like, hey, do you want to be on the show? And they're like, nah, no, thank you. And, I, thankfully haven't anyone deny a request. Also, I think it's because I ask mainly artists, and a lot of artists don't get asked to be on podcasts. It's usually the writers, which is weird to me. I would think that, you would want to have, like, not that people don't, because there's plenty of artists who go on podcasts and stuff, but I think as a whole, you see the writer on the show, not the artist. But being an artist myself, it's like, well, yeah. And of course, the underlying thing is we all have those three things in common, but that's not always a, comics, coffee, metal. That's not always the be all end all. Like, a great comic book artist, Ramon Villalobos, I've known him for a few years. He doesn't drink coffee, but he loves seltzer water, and I love seltzer water. So I'm like, okay, let's talk about seltzer water. Like,
yeah, there you go.
And then, there's, my buddy Ryan Lee, another fantastic artist for the IDW series Mountainhead. He, he's not really a metal guy, but he likes this kind of like punk grunge type stuff. And I'm like, so let's talk about that. Like, it stems from, well, that's the jumping off point. It's not like a hard criteria. And it really is based out of my love of hearing people talk about things they're passionate about.
Yep.
So, because I can watch a documentary on, like Jiro Dreams of Sushi. I don't care about sushi. I don't care about fish. But this is a documentary about people passionate about what they're doing. And it was fascinating.
No, 100%, dude. I mean, and that goes back to, what I was saying earlier about Secret Identity, and again, with the show as well. And that was one of the reasons I kind of changed this show from being primarily a writing focused podcast, which is when it first started, which is what it was, to just conversations with creative people, like musicians, artists, writers, photographers, like marketers, like, and basically, because it goes back to what you said, talking to people about the things that they're passionate about, talking to people about the creative process, about their creative journey, like all of those things, selfishly for myself, I'm fascinated by. So I get something out of every single episode that I get to talk to someone, because I get to hear about those things, which are all fascinating to me. But also, hopefully, for the people that are listening to the show, there's something in every episode that will resonate with them. Of like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. Or, oh, yeah, I'm going to try that. Or, oh, that's an interesting take on this particular topic. And I think you're doing a fantastic job with the podcast. I just listened to the Sophie Campbell episode, which she was talking about. I think the name of the band was Blackguard.
Yeah.
So I just added them to my. Oh,
they're really good.
I hadn't really heard much from them, but I'd heard the name before. But that's I immediately added them to my sort of music queue, so I can check out more of their stuff, and started looking at her TMNT issues that she's done, which I haven't read TMNT in a long time.
No, it's really great stuff. And Brian's talking about Sophie Campbell, who has been in the industry for quite a while, but she's recently been charged with the IDW version of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, like the head writer and artist, and it's amazing. And she's someone who I didn't know. Like, I kind of just like had maybe a handful of Twitter interactions and all that, but she was friends with mutual people that we knew. So I just asked her, like, hey, I know, because I knew she liked metal, and she draws Ninja Turtles for like, why wouldn't I want to talk to this person? And you bring up, she brought up this band Blackguard, and that's a great thing that's been going on, where it's like, I consider myself a pretty, well-rounded person when it comes to music and lots of metal bands and stuff like that. But without fail, when someone's telling me what they're digging metal-wise, I'm like, I haven't heard that. Like, let me go check that out. That's really cool. And so that's been a real fun thing for me too, because I like discovering new cool stuff. And, if it comes from someone I'm speaking to and hearing them talk about why they like it and all that, I'm much more likely to check it out than just like a random review I see posted by a website or something like that.
For sure. Absolutely. So, and congratulations, by the way, because I know that you just posted your 25th episode of the podcast recently. So that's a nice milestone.
Yes, with one of my best buds, Sean Pryor, and we didn't talk about metal. He talked about the latest Busta Rhymes album, and that's what he was into, and that's fine. And he recommended this like R&B funk type band called Lakeside. That's something he's been jamming on too. So I checked that out. I'm like, this is some fun, like if you're familiar with that old Coolio song, Fantastic Voyage. Like,
oh yeah,
that's that he sampled them. So I'm like, okay, I'll check this out. If Sean's digging it, I'll check it out. And, it's not metal at all, but it's like, this is good music, and, I consider myself like a jack of all trades when it comes to knowing things in life, but I'm also kind of like a jack of all interests.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, I have the comics, I have music, I have the podcast, and yeah, it's just I find this, things utterly fascinating about a lot of different things, and for good or bad time wise, I enjoy kind of like diving into these varied pools of random topics. But the podcasting has been fun. It can be stressful, but in terms of like scheduling and things like that, but I've really kind of, after 25 episodes, I kind of have a little bit of a groove going in terms of what I expect and what I'm doing. And also I know what I can improve on now and what I can do. And like, little things here and there. Like when I spoke to you, like you mentioned that you sit on a yoga ball so that way their chair doesn't squeak and stuff like that. And I'm literally
sitting on that yoga ball right now.
I'm literally sitting on a pink yoga ball right now that my kids have to like, slam around the house. And I'm like, this changes it because, no matter how much tightening or oiling a chair, without fail, you could, every episode's like, squank. It's like, I don't even know where this came from. So, it's like little things like that. Or, when I first started, I was using an SM57 microphone, which is a standard music recording microphone for very loud instruments. My voice is not a very loud instrument. So after talking to a friend, he's like, yeah, you should probably get like a condenser mic or something like that. I'm like, yeah, I probably should. So then I went, and now I have an Audio-Technica AT2020, and that's, one of the most basic condenser mics you have, but the difference is huge. I'm not like blasting the gain on my recording and like, upping the gain, and then like processing it and then upping it again so you can actually hear me. Now everything's kind of fine. So it's little things you pick up along the way. And I realize that, there's a lot of, I need to do more prep, I guess. And that kind of leads into the talking to people I don't really know as well, because if it's a friend and I've known their stuff for years, like I can rattle off what they've done. I can rattle off things like that. But when it's someone I've just met and I'm not 100% sure on what that first book they did was, or, when did they start showing up around in whatever industry they're doing and all that, I need to be better prepared with the notes, which is fine. A little homework's not going to kill you. So, but yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, okay, I'm realizing I need to do this. I'm realizing I need to do this. And then, just kind of seeing like what kind of, don't want to stick with just interview episodes. For a while, I was doing like kind of like mini review episodes and then like discussing a topic afterwards. But it really kind of felt like I felt like I was like rambling way too much on those topic ones and not really having a point. But I like doing the little reviews and things like that. So, and like, I like recommending cool things because I like, it's difficult, but, I'm trying to keep myself on the track of this, putting out positive stuff and not, just, pointing out things that are not good or, and that's kind of like what was happening with I guess the essay episodes you want to call them or whatever, where I'm kind of talking about like something that's like artists versus writers discussion that's ridiculous and things like that. I'd rather just talk about cool stuff, and that's fun and that's positive. So if it's about old comics or new comics or old music or new music, and I'm trying to find the spot where to do that.
I like that take. I like the sort of focus on the positive stuff. Not that there's not a place for heavy discussion, right? I mean, there's the world is heavy right now. There's a lot of heavy stuff going around, and but
the key word is discussion, though. And if these are solo episodes, it's me, and it really feels like I'm just for lack of a better analogy, it really just felt like I was just reading extended, like someone stitched together a thread of tweets, and I'm just kind of reading it.
Well, and it's also like why, and this answer is different for everybody, right? But like, why are people listening to your show?
Yeah.
Right. So what is the thing that they're coming to you for? And if it's because your show is a essay driven, focused topic of the week, heavy discussion show, then everybody knows what they're getting when they sort of come to that show. Right. And so it is, but to me, like, that's one of the things that I find fascinating about the podcasting journey is that you start with a pretty good idea of what you think that you want to do. And then you get into it and you start to make some adjustments, and that sort of adjustment arc goes on for a little while. And then you hit your stride, and then you are in that groove for a while. And then at some point you maybe reinvent a little bit. I mean, we did that with Secret Identity a couple times and just kind of tweaked things here and there, but that's all part of that sort of journey. And it's the same thing with like your process, right? When you first start, you're over editing and you're, going through your audio and trying to cut out every and every time you smack your lips and every kind of, and then you realize that your editing time is 3 times the amount of time that it takes you to record a podcast. And so you sort of start to, make that a little bit more efficient. You prep a little bit more upfront. You, like you said, you buy a different microphone, that kind of stuff. But then you also, start to realize that if the audio quality of the show is good enough and the content is good, then people don't care if you say every now and again. And so like that's where but it's all part of that learning curve, right? Which I actually think is really cool, because everybody goes through that, and then you get to a point where you've got your process down. You can put your show together in a certain amount of time every episode. You know what you're doing, and you use the tools that are most comfortable for you, and all of that stuff kind of falls into place over the first few dozen episodes that you do. And then you're in your groove, and it's just about the show.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. When I first started, you mentioned the ums and all that, like being from the Midwest, was huge. Whenever I was saying, it was like every sentence was like, and that, and it got to a point where I was able to recognize the waveform.
Oh yeah.
Editing. So I was like, all right, I either need to like really focus and double down on not saying so many because I'm not going to sit here and edit every single one out. And like you said, it get to a point where if you're listening to a conversation, the conversation is interesting, like a 1 or 2 second pause or a little bit of a dragging or like right now where like maybe I'm trying to like, I don't know, maybe think of what I'm trying to say next and kind of working it out while I'm in that manner. People don't care. They're just along with you. And so that's probably one of the biggest things, because I try to do as little editing as possible.
Which is how it should be. Like that's my biggest piece of advice to anybody doing a podcast is like, you need to get to the point where it doesn't take you longer to edit a show than it takes you to record it. That to me, that's the golden ratio. So if I do a show where the episode is an hour long, it should take me less than an hour to edit that episode. And that might seem crazy at first. For some people, it might seem like, yeah, that's my normal thing. But like when we first started doing Secret Identity, like I was spending 2 to 3 times as much time editing as it took us to record a show.
Yeah.
And that is just a recipe for disaster. Like you have to get that ratio down to as close to 1-to-1 as it can be. And that's not to say that it'll always be that, but the closer that you can get to that, the better.
Yeah. And I've actually had a couple episodes where when we're done, I'm like, all right, I just got to like do my intro and just pop the music cues in and we're done. Like I don't have to edit anything.
That's another great thing too, dude, because like when we first started doing it, like I remember that was another thing with Secret Identity where it was like we had so many segment breaks when we first started doing the show. And all that did was made it harder to edit. Because it was like, and then I was like, why are we doing, like, we can literally just say that we're moving on to the next segment. We don't have to, like, so that was a hard lesson learned, as well as like, you want to drop in all these audio samples and you want to do all this stuff. And like, the more stuff that you add, the longer the editing process is.
It's a 1-to-1 comparison from when I'm drawing. Like I could sit here and I could spend an extra half hour noodling in all these little detail lines or things like that. But how long is someone going to be looking at this panel for it to matter? And we're sitting here, we're listening to our podcast, we're editing them, but we're sitting here focused on the podcast. I don't know a single person in my entire life, including myself, that has ever just like, I sit down quietly and I listen to a podcast. It's like, no, I do the dishes. I'm running errands. Yep. I'm working. So they're not sitting there and like counting the seconds in between pauses and things like that. So unless, obviously there's, extreme versions. If you got a ton of just like really kind of distracting tics or things like that you do, and you kind of have to like just get your confidence up and get a little bit smoothed out with the pauses and the things like that, then yeah, okay, a little bit of editing here or there. But for the most part, people don't notice.
It's kind of like having best practices to follow.
Yeah.
As opposed to hard and fast, being overly aggressive in the way that you kind of produce the show. And yeah. So anyways, I love the podcast. I think you're doing an awesome job with it.
I appreciate it.
Love the interviews, love the guests that you're having on. And obviously all of those topics are very near and dear to me as well, comics, coffee, and metal. And so I'll put a link to the podcast in the show notes so people can check that out. I will put a link to PAX of the Lowcountry on Comixology so people can check that out. What else? Oh, and you're doing Rifttober now too.
Yeah, I just wrapped that up. Yep.
So where can people, is Twitter the best place for them to find all your Rifttober stuff?
Rifttober is mainly an Instagram thing. I'm very easy to find on social media. I'm just at Don Cardenas Art on both Twitter, Instagram, and my Facebook page. So if you just Google Don Cardenas Art, DonCardenas Art, my website should pop up. Those will pop up. Yes, PAX of the Lowcountry, the collected edition, is on Comixology. It's almost 200 pages of stuff. I'm very proud of the book. It was a huge labor of love. It was diving in to do a giant project when I should have done smaller projects first. But I'm proud of the work I did. I also did a soundtrack for that book as well. A very John Carpenter inspired synth metal kind of deal that's available on Bandcamp. If you search PAX of the Lowcountry on Bandcamp, that'll pop up. Or if you buy the book, find me on social media and I'll send you a link to the MP3s for free. Like I'm not worried about making money off of the music. I just want people to enjoy it.
John Carpenter and metal fused together. You're speaking my language. So I'll put links to all of that stuff in the show notes. Now, as far as other projects that you're working on, anything else that you might have coming down the road, is there anything you can talk about now?
Yeah. I've as I mentioned before, I've been doing some short stories. Recently there was a horror anthology called Nightmare Theater that just wrapped up its Kickstarter. But I'm sure that they'll be selling it online and via digital once it's all said and done. I did a really fun 6-page story in there with a really great writer named Philip Charles, who has this kind of dark comic sense of humor. So our story is about, based on a true story from him not being able to get his son to eat anything, about a toddler who becomes so enraged at his parents' behavior towards him about his eating habits, he becomes this giant blobby monster. And it's it's kind of like the Blob meets Problem Child, maybe. I don't know.
I love it. That sounds awesome.
It was a lot of fun to design and to draw, and I did a whole ton of fun work on that. I also did a story with Philip, and I feel terrible because I'm spacing on the name of it because it was beginning of the pandemic, but we did a short story. I believe it was called Housebound: Tales from the Pandemic or something like that. But it was definitely called Housebound. And there's that. I've done a few more short stories that have not had any releases yet. I think they were just done for someone to have, for a writer to have for submittal to other anthologies when it's ready. So I can't maybe mention those. I've been doing some coloring work for a few things, but yeah, I can't really mention that. But I am going to be restarting or kickstarting, I should say, my book Emissary. And I'm probably going to be posting some of those pages up in the new year for everybody on Instagram and Twitter, just to kind of get an idea of it. But it's kind of a dark fantasy about a warrior who is tasked with fighting this dark army every day and preventing them from entering this gate. And he fights this army every day, and he beats them every day, but every day he dies as a result. And then he's reborn the next day, kind of like a Groundhog Day, so to speak. It's not the same day repeated, but it's, just the next day comes and everything starts over again. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of one day, he survives. And then he starts remembering his previous life. And that's kind of where the story picks up and kind of jumpstarts, the real reasons he's doing what he's doing. And is he doomed to do this forever, or is there some way out of it? So, and I've been doing a very heavy metal soundtrack to that. That's available on my, the tracks I have so far are available on my YouTube. If you look Comics, Coffee, Metal on YouTube, I have a whole bunch of music up there, and including some of the initial podcast episodes that were video casts. But yeah, so I kind of, like I said, jack of all interests. I kind of have stuff everywhere.
But that's awesome too, because there's more places for people to find your work, whether they're interested in music, whether they're interested in comics, whether they're interested in your podcast stuff. Like there's plenty for people to kind of sink their teeth into, which is awesome. And I, again, will put all links to all of that stuff into the show notes. And obviously, as you have, whether those short stories or the Emissary stuff comes up, let me know, and I'll definitely spread the word about that too.
And to be succinct about it, if you like metal, if you like riffs and just art, Instagram. That's all I do for the Instagram is just art and guitar stuff. If you like really bad puns mixed in with that stuff, and just maybe, random musings, Twitter, and Facebook is just, I'm terrible at posting on my Facebook page, but that is pretty much just the Instagram page on Facebook. So
something for everyone. And they can find you pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, throw a rock and you'll hit me. Just
there you go.
Just kind of underhand it though. Don't
throw it hard. I mean, you've got a lot of projects you're juggling. You can't be dealing with a concussion on top of that. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show, Don. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And obviously we talk on Twitter all the time, but rarely do we get to catch up for a good amount of time about the stuff that you've been working on and just sort of the creative process in general. So I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of these, the short stories and the Emissary stuff coming up in the new year.
Well, I appreciate it. I love talking to you, man, and any opportunity to do it, I am all for it. And I really appreciate being asked to do this show. I really love this show. I loved your first episode. I care nothing about D&D gaming, but I loved the discussion you guys had about it because you guys are passionate about it, and it was very fascinating to me. So I appreciate being included into this podcast. I look forward to hearing the future episodes as well.
Well, I think folks will get a lot out of hearing you talk about your own creative process and just some of the stuff you've learned along the way. So thanks again, and I will talk to you soon.
All right. See you later.